right, I think it's working. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the explanation for the final research project and proposal letter. And the proposal letter kind of is step one of the final research project process. So what you'll need for this, which is available on Canvas, is the assignment. It looks like this. It says proposal letter and final research project on it. It's got a little bit of information about both. And then also, there are a ton of examples on Canvas. I'm actually going to update it with some newer ones as well. And these are sort of high quality final research projects that you can take a look at to get a feel for different formats and different potential topics. So skip the proposal letter piece for now, and we're going to bump down to the final research project and talk a little bit about it. Then I'll tell you about the proposal letter, which is basically where you're proposing your final research project. So for your final research project, you're going to write a formal report on a technical topic of your choice. What does technical mean? Well, it can really be anything that is technique or data driven. There's a science element to it. There's a data element to it. There's a numerical element to it. Typically people choose engineering topics and they choose, science related topics, but you certainly can pick things that have an element of technicality but aren't really in the science realm. And there are some kind of neat examples of this on Canvas as well. The Tech Writing Award winner for the year 2018, his paper I'm posting for you on Canvas, it's an economics topic, and he was a student of mine, which is cool. But yeah, so he won the Tech Writing Award for 2018, and it's not even an engineering related topic, but it is certainly data driven. There's a Tech Writing Award runner-up, or I think honorable mention or something like that from the previous year, and I'll post his paper as well. He was one of my students, and his paper was called The Rise of Taiwanese Identity. And when he first proposed it to me, I suggested, I don't know if that's going to be technical enough. He goes, oh, no, I can find a lot of data. It's going to be great. And as it turned out, there was a lot of analysis that he could do. It wasn't all qualitative. And so that was really neat, and that ended up working out. So you really can stretch your mind to topics that you're interested in and think about them in different realms and in different ways to kind of figure out what you want to do. Some possible formats are a proposal, an analytical report, a recommendation report, a feasibility study, which is kind of a subset of recommendation reports. It's a type of recommendation report. If you're doing primary research for your lab, you're doing some sort of primary research on your own, you can write a scientific research report on it, so like a journal article or something that maybe resembles a really mini kind of senior thesis or graduate thesis, that sort of thing. So if you have an idea for a scientific research report of the type that would be published in a journal about your primary research, you can do that, particularly if you're going to graduate school and you're kind of planning on that route. This might be a good chance to practice those skills. I've had students do review articles on the topic of their research that they do in their lab, and that's another type of scientific research report. One of the formats in recent years that I've allowed for my students to do, and they seem to have great fun with it, is a magazine article. And it is kind of neat to take the research that you do and the thing that you learn about and figure out how to distill it down to something that's of interest to a more general public audience. So a magazine article is another possibility. And I will post examples of all of these things on Canvas. So the one thing that I'm kind of saying don't do for now is an informational report. And there are little tweaks to this. Those of you who are doing a scientific research report reporting your primary research that you've done, that is largely informational. And that's okay, I think, because you've done the hard work of actually doing that research. And so it's not an informational report on something that you've sort of learned from secondary sources. It's an informational report of primary research that you're doing. So a scientific research report is fine, but otherwise an informational report I'm going to say no on that. And the reason is I'm really interested in your analytical skills and how you bring them to bear on a topic. Essentially, I think an informational report is just a little bit easy for this. And I want to give you a challenge. I want to challenge you to think about it, to do something with the information you find. That doesn't mean that you won't use informational reports in your life. You'll probably write quite a lot of them, but you are going to get to practice that skill in many of these kinds of reports, because in order to make those recommendations or in order to do that analysis, at first you have to figure out how to present the information you found. So you're still using that informational report skill, but then you're taking it one step further or two steps further to analyze and make recommendations on it. Then the other type of thing that is a possibility for a final research project, but you have to run it by me, is an instruction manual. If you have a real idea for an instruction manual, something maybe for your student group or for your lab or for a class if you're a TA, maybe for the place that you work, I'm okay with you doing an instruction manual. I do want you to run it by me first. A lot of instruction manuals are not challenging enough or not technical enough for this class and for this project. So that's why I want you to run it by me. But there have been some really cool instruction manuals over the years. I had a student maybe about 3 or 4 summers ago. It was probably 4 years ago. It was a while ago. And he worked at the observatory at the top of Crow. And he put together an instruction manual for people who were trying to, so they have students work at the observatory, and so it does have a lot of turnover because people graduate and stuff like that. And it was a manual for the other students who were working at the observatory on how to properly position and focus the telescope for particular celestial objects. And then he also included for those most common celestial objects what things they could tell people about, because they're also educators when they position that telescope and they are showing us the moons of Jupiter. What's interesting about the moons of Jupiter? What's interesting about Saturn's rings, or why we can see Saturn right now, or, what might we need to know about the moon. So it was cool. He set it up as an instruction manual, not only for the sort of technical how to position the telescope, but also that educational aspect of how do you talk about it. Those are tornado sirens, but I think this is just a test. So if you're hearing this weird noise in the background, I'm not sure what's going on, but it's definitely not storming outside. So they're testing some sort of thing, or maybe it's a machine back there that's doing some construction. So sorry about the weird noise. So you want to pick something that's complex enough for a project of this length. So what length? What are we looking at here? You're looking at roughly 15 to 25 pages. And that includes images, and that includes your summary, and that includes a lot of things. So at first it might be really daunting. You might be like, 15 to 25 pages? I've never written anything that long before. And it's okay. I think you'll find that it's definitely doable, especially once you think about incorporating graphics. If you're like, oh, I want to showcase this thing in a table or a graph, and then I'm going to talk about it, that ends up taking up quite a lot of space. That 15, it's not like a hard, super duper hard minimum. If your paper ends up being 14 and a half pages or something like that, don't start adding unnecessary sentences just to get it to 15. That really defeats the purpose. What I mean is that you should pick something that's complex enough that you need that length to do it justice. So if you've done a great job writing about your topic and you're done after 7 pages, double-spaced, then your topic didn't have quite enough meat to it. You're going to want to figure out how to build something onto that, or do more analysis, or ask yourself harder questions about your topic to be able to then analyze a little bit more. So that 15 to 25, it's kind of a rough guideline. Is 25 a hard maximum? No. If it's going to be more than 30, please give me a heads up. Let me know that you're giving me something more than 30 pages. That's if it's double spaced. So if it's single spaced, the equivalent is 15, right? So, just give me a heads up that something that long is coming my way. You can still do it. And people do, especially if what they're writing, they're going to be using in a context outside of this class. Maybe they're writing up their research for their PI, and the task that they have for that independent study is supposed to be 30 pages or something like that. That's perfectly fine. I am happy to read 30 pages of yours. Just let me know that that's what's coming. If it's going to be more than 40 pages, I don't know, that's a little bit long. Tell me what 30-ish pages you want me to read. I have had a student once who, he was very ambitious, which was cool, and he came up with a topic he really loved, and it was a statistical analysis of a topic related to baseball. And the final paper he handed me was, this is crazy, it was 61 pages, 1.5 spaced. So it wasn't even double spaced. It was 1.5 spaced. So you can multiply that out and figure out what that would be double spaced. It's crazy. It's crazy. He wrote a book, basically. And he drove himself crazy doing it, right? Because that's a lot of work for a 3-credit class. So don't pick something that takes 80 pages to do well. If you need 80 pages to do justice to your topic, maybe narrow down to just a slice of it. Imagine that it's one chapter in the book you would someday write, or one magazine article in a series of 4 or something like that. And that's one way to narrow it down. So what's your audience for this? It really could be anything, but you're going to specify your audience. So if it's a proposal, you're trying to get funding or approval for a project, it might be the undergraduate research office. It might be the company that you're trying to get to give you funding for something. So that would be a specific audience, maybe a government organization. If it's an analytical report or recommendation report, you might ask, okay, who am I making these recommendations to? And I'll be able to give you some really good examples. So then with scientific research reports, if it is a journal article, then your audience will be really obvious because you'll have an abstract and you'll be reporting your scientific research, and it'll be obvious that it's peers in your field and professors in your field, and it's a very expert audience. With a magazine article, if it isn't for a real, like you can specify it like as a real magazine, like Popular Science or The New Yorker or something like that, or you can make up a magazine, but just kind of make it clear what the audience for that magazine is if you make it up, if it's not already obvious. Typically the magazine articles are interested general public, or if you want to do it as a blog post, you can actually present this electronically, and I'll try to remember to post a couple of those on Canvas, because I've had a couple of students do really interesting blog posts, and blog posts allow you to embed video and things like that you can't really do in a like paper printed space. So that's a little bit about audience. And the audience can be hypothetical. Also, you can be hypothetical in your role. So like an example is I had a student once who was an intern at General Mills, and she was putting together a report. They had set out this challenge for their engineers where they wanted to come up with, it was like, let me see if I can explain this, some sort of way to take 2 layers of food. So you needed some sort of food safe barrier, and it could be an edible barrier or a non-edible barrier. And you would be able to heat this thing up, and there would be such a temperature differential. Essentially what it was is that you could bake an ice cream pie, and the ice cream would stay frozen and the pie crust would bake. So this huge temperature differential. And they were trying to look for materials to create those layers where one would be really cold and one could get really hot. And she was analyzing one material on all 6 criteria that they had laid out. I think it was rice husks. All 6 criteria they had laid out to see if it would be a feasible material for this. In the end, her conclusion was that no, it would not, because while it satisfies maybe criteria 1 and criteria 2, the other 4 were just unknowns. But she pretended that she was a full-time engineer at General Mills and that she had was maybe the head of a department or was a little bit higher up than a student intern. So you can do that. You can pretend that you're higher up in an organization, or I think one of the examples online, it's kind of an older one, is from a student whose father had a heating and cooling business in Kansas City, and he did a recommendation report for a particular client on 2 or 3 different kinds of heat pumps, heating systems, to see, if he would recommend a ground source heat pump or their sort of standard heating system that they were already using. But he did it on behalf of his dad's company as if he were somebody who worked there. So you can do that. You can be a little bit hypothetical. It could be like, oh, and I work at this company, or oh, and I have a PhD. So that can be a little hypothetical thing. But even as a student, if you want to do it and not be somebody who's been an engineer at General Mills for 5 years, if you want to just be somebody who's a student intern there, but you're submitting this report as well, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. Even if, specifically General Mills might say, well, we really wanted people with 2 years experience at the company. You can still do this for them and imagine that you're submitting it. So you can format it however you want. Like a blog post, if it's a magazine article, it's often single-spaced and maybe in double columns or triple columns or something like that. Images embedded. You can single-space, you can 1.5 space, you can double-space, you can do it online. So there's many, many ways that you can set this up. That 15 to 20, I think the sheet here says 15 to 20. I'm perfectly okay with you going up to 25. But really kind of that sweet spot is right around 20 pages. So, yeah, that 15 to 25 guideline, that's for double-spaced papers. So just think about what the equivalent would be. If you're single-spacing a magazine article and you've bumped it down to 10-point font, it might be 5 to 6 pages long. It's a smaller font. You're going double columns, so you can actually fit more in there. So it might be roughly 15 pages if you were to double space it, like a 12-point double spaced document. And then when you shrink it down and you condense it down that way, it ends up being maybe 5 or 6 or something like that, or maybe 10-ish max. Because 10, if you multiplied it out and you double spaced it and took it away from double columns and put it in single column, it would be about 25 pages. I think something collapses a little bit when you put it in double columns. You're able to fit a little bit more in there. But yeah, you can go a little over 25. That's fine. So you can make the project as long as you need it to be, but really within reason. So some tips about the writing process. You want to identify a few potential topics, and that's what we're doing in class with Lauren, the subject librarian, who's presenting to you about just ways of exploring different topics and finding sources on them. So do some research on all of them. It's your own feasibility study on the best research topic. You're taking a look at what's out there, what can I find, what's inspiring me. Decide on your topic, and then maybe think about what way do I want to set this up? Do I want a particular audience? Do I want this to be a recommendation report? That kind of thing. Once you start actually writing, once you outline and start actually writing, my suggestion is to write the middle first. To start by writing the informational aspects and the analytical aspects of it, and only then worry about introducing and concluding, and only then worry about your summary or abstract and anything later like sources and stuff like that. So it's very logical, instead of going top to bottom, to go from the center and work your way out. So that's my suggestion for how to approach this. It might feel really weird if you're a linear person, you like to start with the introduction. If you do start with the introduction, that's fine. Just keep in mind that you're probably going to change the whole thing after your analysis because you don't quite know what you're going to end up discovering along the way. So then you're going to revise and edit and proofread along the way. We're going to be doing quite a lot of that in class, and I have a lot of exercises and a lot of in-class stuff that you're going to be doing. I'm going to take a look at your rough drafts myself in conferences. You're going to have a chance to peer review rough drafts for that second draft. So really, you have a lot of chances to take this and make it what you want it to be. And at the end, you would want to ask yourself, Does it showcase my knowledge of the subject? Does this showcase my strong analytical skills? Does this show my writing skills in a really wonderful light? Is this professionally written, and does it look professional? Would I be proud to turn this into my audience? And you can even take that one step further if you want and actually turn it into your audience. Is this one of the best things I've ever written? If you've really done this right, you should walk away from this feeling like this is one of the best things you've ever written. You should be so proud of yourself. And I know that's like hard right now. It's early in the process. You're thinking, man, how am I going to get there? One little step at a time. First, identify a couple topics, then narrow down an audience and a focus. So here are some tips about choosing a topic. Sometimes if you're struggling, you're working on let's say you're working on a draft or you're working on an outline for something and you're like, I just don't have a lot to say about this. I'm not finding a lot of stuff. It might make sense to narrow your focus. And that feels counterintuitive. You're like, but wait a second. Narrow my focus? I'm having trouble finding stuff. If I make my focus more narrow, then how am I going to find stuff? It's actually limiting me more. Sometimes limitation is great. And having that specific focus will open up a lot of possibilities for what you can do. So here are just a few really quick off the top of my head things that people have done. And I've already mentioned that one for the animal hospital about heating systems. I already mentioned a couple others. And I'm just going to dump a bunch of examples on Canvas. I would suggest kicking back some evening, just get comfortable and read a few of them. Read one of each format. Read the ones that the topic is of interest to you. Explore them and kind of see what people have done. Now, they didn't start with something that beautifully and fully formed. They started with a big jumbled mess of an outline and a bunch of stuff and not finding what they were looking for and all that kind of stuff. And then they refined and refined and refined over the course of a month. So what you're seeing is like the best of the best papers after a lot of work. And so don't be intimidated by them. I want them to be kind of aspirational. Like you look at them and then you think, maybe I can aspire to this. Maybe I can write something that's really, really high quality like this. Or if you look at it and you're like, psh, I can do that. That's not too intimidating. Well, that's great then. It should inspire you in some way to be able to get started. So an example of a proposal. One of the examples on Canvas is a student who had this idea for primary research just on her own, and she was trying to get funding from the undergraduate research office. And the idea was, so she was from Delaware, and they were working on a cleanup effort for their beaches. I guess what had happened is the military, over the course of a number of decades, had been dumping military unused ordnance, just unused shells and scraps of metal and whatever weaponry stuff. They were dumping this stuff off the coast far enough into the ocean that it would be no big deal. And that was something that they had been doing for a while. Well, the state of Delaware decided that their beaches were getting eroded, so they were going to dredge up sand from inside the ocean and use it to build back the beaches. You could see where this is going. Delaware didn't really check with the federal government and the military and all of that to make sure that sand was something that they could use. They figured, we're Delaware, we own this, this amount of beach or whatever, so we're just going to dredge up this sand and do this. So they did. And now the beaches, and this was 10 years ago, so they're probably fine by now, but the beaches ended up with scraps of stuff that had been discarded by the military into the ocean, and now it's in that beach where kids play, and we want people visiting, and it's supposed to be very pedestrian friendly. And so this student was from Delaware, so she decided she was going to go with a metal detector and safety equipment and sample areas of the beach, and she had set it up into zones so that she could kind of take data from each zone, and with those samples figure out which areas of this particular beach had the most metal in them. And based on that, then she would be able to guide the state of Delaware to help them with their cleanup effort. And I think she did actually do this project over a spring or a summer or something like that, which was cool. It wasn't a ton of equipment she needed. I believe she already had a metal detector. It was mostly safety equipment and stuff like that. But that's what she came up with, which is cool. So if you identify a problem and you have this idea that you would want to solve it, even if it's sort of hypothetical, if you're like, I'm never going to go out to the beach and actually take the metal detector, if as a thought experiment you want to think about it, you can do it. So that's an example of a proposal to do research. An analytical report, well, I should say there are proposals to actually implement something, and a lot of people choose a course proposal. They have an idea for a class or changes to an existing class that they want to implement here at WashU, and that's something that you can propose to the university or to the engineering school or to your department. You might have to look at what peer institutions are doing. You might have to take a survey of your fellow students to see what the level of interest for that class is. You'll have to figure out what's involved in teaching this class. What do we have to pay somebody? What's the overhead with all of this? And so, ideas for classes range. But if you've ever said, there really should be a class on X in my discipline, whatever that X is, you can propose it and you can make it happen. EN 120, fun fact, EN 120 started out as a tech writing project back in the 90s. It was somebody's idea that they used for their tech writing project, and then they actually brought it to life. So, you can actually do this and come up with a cool idea and make a difference. Or you might propose something to your student group or to student union or something like that. Analytical reports, recommendation reports, you'll be able to see quite a lot of examples of those on Canvas, especially recommendation reports. I think that's a really popular choice. And there are two sides of the same coin, really. An analytical report, you look at a topic and you analyze, maybe compare and do some analysis between a couple options for something. But with an analytical report, you stop short of actually recommending a course of action after that. Whereas with a recommendation report, you take that analysis and those conclusions you've come to, and they lead you to a recommendation. You can actually tell the people, here's what you should do. But sometimes that analysis doesn't really lend itself to a should at all. And so that's the difference between those. And you might start on the report and not really know whether it's going to be an analytical report or a recommendation report until you complete that analysis. And that's totally fine. A feasibility study is a type of recommendation report. We'll take a look at those and kind of talk about them. As far as magazine articles go, I know that magazine articles are in life largely informational, and yours can be largely informational, but it should have some element of analysis in it. You should be looking at something that involves you bringing your mind to bear on this issue. It might be that like 80% of what you're writing is informational, and that's fine, but maybe just as you conclude, thinking about, okay, where is this technology going? What's the feasibility of us implementing it? Or what does the timeline look like? How does it compare to what we have already? Those kinds of things can be really great for magazine articles. So think a little bit beyond, here's all this cool stuff I found. And it should be, here's all this cool stuff I found, and here's what I think about it in a evidence-based way. Magazine articles, there's a lot of cool examples. That's been a really popular choice over the last few years that students have decided to do as a format, and it's really neat and it's really fun. You get to play around with design too as you think about how to format things on the page. So if that's of interest to you, then magazine article can be a really neat format. There are pieces of these that we'll talk about along the way, and there's a checklist that's up on Canvas, and I will give it to you in class and we'll talk about it. That's got all the sections that you would need for different kinds of papers. But as an overview, this is what the assignment's all about. And I think the best way to get a feel for it is to look at some examples. Just look at them. You don't have to read them carefully. You don't have to analyze every sentence. They're excellent examples, but there might be mistakes still. There might be something that's awkwardly worded. There might be some passive voice. Maybe not a lot of passive voice, though. I don't know. If it's a scientific research report, of course, I understand that your methods are going to be in passive voice because the journal that you're submitting to would probably want that, or your PI would probably want that. But yeah, as you take a look at these, you'll see maybe some things that you would change or that you would advise that peer to change. And yet, I think you'll see some really cool stuff. So it's really neat. It's kind of a fun way to just sit and learn about a few things too. Some of the more extremely technical stuff you might look at and be like, okay, I appreciate what this person's writing about, but I don't really understand a lot of it, and that's fine. Some of the stuff that's geared towards a more general public audience, you can really think of yourself as the audience for it and dig into it and start reading and learn a little something about algorithmic trading or Taiwanese identity, or there was a really cool and quite technical journal article that a student did a couple years ago, and this was one of those Tech Writing Award finalists as well, that was about young adult movies and thinking about those films and how they how the trends work as far as which movies are really successful at the box office and whether you can predict the next great success or kind of how that wave is going to go. And she looked at trends in young adult movies and how much money they make and what they're about. And that sounds maybe not that technical, but it turned out to be quite technical, but also really interesting. And I don't watch a lot of young adult movies. I guess I've seen a lot of the movies she was talking about. She discussed the Harry Potter movies and the Hunger Games movies, so those sort of wildly successful franchises. But she was looking at a number of different criteria as to, like, is this what makes them successful? What makes these franchises so successful? And then how do other things ride that wave? And so even if it's not inherently of interest to you, once you see an analysis like that, it gets interesting. So take a look at a few of these and just read through them. I think that's the best way to get a feel for this assignment. Really more than just like listening to me talk about things that people have done. And so yeah, for now, just explore some possible topics, some things you're interested in learning. You might start by thinking about the things you already know a lot about, like the research you do, or something you learned in a class that was really cool or that you had to research. And then you can kind of figure it out from there. But you might also think about things you just want to learn more about. This is a great opportunity to delve into a subject that you're just interested in. And you haven't had a chance to really study it very much because you're busy and you have other classes where you have to learn about a lot of stuff pertaining to your discipline. You might say, I've always wanted to, well, here's an example that was super cool. A student, maybe about a year ago or so, came up with this idea that he would propose to the psychology department to teach a psychology class focused around the show Black Mirror, the Netflix show Black Mirror. And so he had a chance to analyze actual episodes, but he also did surveys of students to see what their interest level would be. He took a look at other pop culture texts like television shows and films that have courses based around them at peer institutions. You know how WashU is with its peer institutions. WashU loves to be like Harvard and MIT and all that stuff, right? So he took a look at a lot of really top tier universities and what they were doing with television shows and movies in their psych departments or maybe in other departments beyond just the film department. But he was able to look at a lot of that. But it really was just born out of, like, he loved the show Black Mirror. He thought about it. He was like a psych minor, and he was like, psychology should totally have a class about this. It would be amazing. And so he came up with it and really kind of did a lot of research and proposed it. So, if you just have an idea or something you want to learn more about, this is a really great opportunity to do it. Whatever you choose, you should love. That's the important thing. You should be really into it because you have to spend a month on this thing. So a little more than a month. Really, it's kind of a month and a half. So if you're going to be spending a month and a half on it and it's boring to you, it's going to end up with a boring paper, and then it's going to be boring to me also and any reader. And your classmate who reads it, they're going to be bored by it. Like if you, the writer, are bored by it, it's just really hard to make it exciting for anyone else.